Hi, guys, and welcome back to the Flourishing Society Podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of being joined by James Elliott, who is a psychotherapist and CBT practitioner and an author of Think Yourself Resilient, which I have now started reading as well. So for James, for the audience who might not have heard of you, how and why did you get into doing what you do in the first place?
Wow. Great. So it's a long, like all of these things, it's quite a long story. So I joined the British Army in 2016 and became a paratrooper, became part of the British Airborne Forces. Before I joined the army, I was in and out of homelessness. So went homeless about 16, in and out of that homelessness state. Didn't do great at school. My dad had gone to prison when I was 13. He was a drug dealer and an extremely prolific child abuser. My mum would run away with my sister when I was 5. So I had this like incredibly challenging childhood upbringing. Joined the army as an escape, to fulfill my basic needs. I joined the army, absolutely fell in love with it, but had that service of time, deployment in Afghanistan, and in 2015, sort of lots of a culmination of childhood and lots of things reared their ugly head, and I really struggled with my mental health. I had just failed selection into the SAS, and had a terrible collapse on my mental health. And whilst kind of being unable really to fulfill all of my duties at work, I was approached by a guy in the regiment. Now, every regiment has a guy who kind of like everyone's dad. Mine was Lee Soapy. He's like 6'6" and he has no front teeth. And he comes to my room and he goes, "Colchester Rugby Club are looking for a strength conditioning coach. You're a physical training instructor. They'll really get on with you. You've played loads of rugby. They'll be onto that." And I was like, "I don't really want to, And then the thing with Soaps is you can do what he wants, or you can do what he wants with a black eye. Either way, you're going to do what he wants. And then he punches you in the face, and then you remember that you did want to go be a strength conditioning coach for him. And he took me to Colchester Rugby Club, and I fell in love with it. And I realized that there was so much more to coaching people than the kind of army, do what I say or I'm going to hit you. And I fell in love with it. And that really helped rehabilitate me, bring me back into full-time work properly, get my mind back in the game. And at the same time, the RAF has turned to the army and said, "We can't meet your parachuting needs anymore. You're going to have to slow down." And the army went, "No, we're just going to pick our best instructors to go down, and they're going to become the first ever sort of tactical parachuting instructors," which is as good a job as it sounds, because it was just amazing. And I got picked, and I went down there with 7 other guys who were all top-end instructors. And we formed the British Army's first ever tactical parachuting instructors platoon, which was, I was parachuting in the day, playing rugby of an evening, pumping iron. It was just the best time. But when I was there, I realized that if I took a lot of the athlete coaching, because Colchester Rugby Club's a National League rugby team, guys from there went on to go play Premiership rugby. So guys who never deadlifted or squatted before, when played Exeter Chiefs in the season where Exeter Chiefs pretty much beat everyone, or they went to Saracens, or they went to Cornish Pirates, or they went to Northampton Saints. So they went to the top rugby clubs, and I taught them how to bench press and squat and deadlift and all of that great stuff. Teach them about food. And I realized that a lot of the key psychological skills like anxiety regulation and emotional control and breathing techniques that were so applicable to the athletes were also applicable to the young soldiers who, much like me at the parachute training school, the first time we're on board an aircraft, someone's tying a weapon to them and throwing them out with it. So those key skills that apply to athletes also apply to the young soldiers. And I kind of wind up sending Army headquarters a message and saying, "Listen, we do it wrong." My experience was we waited until soldiers were absolutely broken before we then did anything about it. And that's not how it should be. We should be talking about preventative methods to mental health. We should be looking at resilience to that development. Here's what I've been doing at the parachute training school. And they took a look at it and they went, "This is great." And then I got a posting order come through and said, in 2 weeks' time, you're out of the parachute training school, you come to Army headquarters, and you're going to become the second in command of British Army mental resilience training. And this is 2018. This is still long before resilience was a public concept. And so off I went to the Army headquarters, and we developed this package. And then my job was to go from camp to camp to camp, stand up in front of regiments as this Bakshi corporal level, Bakshi full screw, and say, "This is how we develop resilience. This is what we can see. This is what the study suggests." And I started my academic study in there. Started doing sports psychology, started moving on to sort of broader psychology pieces before realizing that cognitive behavioral therapy, particularly in effect trauma, is what I really, really love. And I wound up leaving the army 2 years later, having done thousands of hours of this delivery, getting finishing my degree in effective coaching and mentoring, stepping out with this advanced psychology piece that I then started doing during COVID-19. So I stepped out in 2019, stepped out and yeah, just did all of this studying in my own time. And basically treated COVID-19 like I was back at school, and then walked from there into working with like the Paralympic rowing team doing their resilience coaching. They all did me a solid and got gold medals. I then got invited and then worked with Police Scotland, which was 23,000 officers. I'm now like a civilian. And I finished all of my psychotherapeutic training, get qualified, and then I was like, well, I'm going to leave this private practice and set myself up on my own. And people were like, you can't do that. And I was like, yeah, I can. Like, I can just set it up as a virtual clinic. And so I set myself up as an independent virtual clinic. And yeah, and then I was like, right, well, in the first 6 months, I want to have 12 clients. And within the first 48 hours, I'd had 30. So I was like, what? Like crazy. And then, you know, now I go and I work at like top end athletes or like really vulnerable veterans. So, you know, I'm working with lots of people who you would know, you know, I get invited into Parliament. I do talks in Parliament. I did some work with the CCRC, the Criminal Conviction Review Committee, talking about sub-threshold related symptoms in effect to those with post-traumatic stress disorder and crime. I did a talk at Oxford University about how to communicate more effectively with vulnerable veterans. After that, they were like, that's amazing. Like they really enjoyed it. The woman who set me up on there is still, I'm really close to. She's amazing. And she's such a brilliant woman. And yeah, and then I got asked that, how far is your academic studies going? Would you be interested in taking it further? And I said, well, yeah, but you know, my mum used to say to me, the only way you're going to go to a university is to clean their toilets. Like, I'm not smart enough for university. And I've got like another few thousand words to go. And then I finished my dissertation for my Masters of Science in War Psychiatry from King's. You know, so, and then I wrote a book, and then that's gone to 25th in the world. And it was like #1 for psychology on Amazon for like a few weeks, which was mind blowing. Like I couldn't get my head around that. So yeah, that was my journey. So I have like all of these one-on-one clients that come on board. I have a lot of bodybuilders. I have a lot of those people who are, you know, about to get on stage and are having like real like internal struggles. It's really interesting because the vast majority of bodybuilders that I get are either prepping for stage or they've just stepped off of stage and they're going, what?
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's a bit about me, and I know that's a lot and I get excited, but yeah, that's where I'm at.
No, it's also relevant, and a large part of why we wanted to get you on is obviously because of your past experience, but you now work one-to-one with a lot of people in the fitness industry.
Yeah.
With the kinds of things that myself and Charlie help people with, such as their body image, their identity, their relationship with food, their physical and mental health. And obviously you're way more qualified than myself and Charlie and have a lot more experience working with clients on the deeper rooted psychological aspect of things. So your expertise is so relevant, and I think so many people who listen to this podcast will really value what you have to say. When it comes to the people that you work with one-to-one in the fitness industry, are they majoritively coaches, or are they just people who are involved in fitness themselves? That's
a really, so first of all, thank you for saying such a lovely thing about me. That is very kind. I appreciate it. And it's like a really interesting mix. The vast majority I find of the kind of higher performing, I'm doing the air quotation marks for anyone listening, the higher performing bodybuilders tend to be coaches themselves anyway. But the context of which they're approaching me isn't as a coach, it's as a competitor. So there's a slightly different aspect to that, because although psychoeducation piece is important for anybody, like there's the saying, couldn't think of the motto, is the word I'm looking for. The motto of the parachute training school is knowledge dispels fear. And I find that to be true in psychoeducation. If you can understand that there's a neurobiological process happening that allows you to manage it more effectively, which is applicable to both, of course, coaches and of course, competitors. But with the coaches, there tends to be an element of I'm educating them to educate others. Here's how you can drip feed this information to your clients. So it's not just about you as an individual helping, although of course it is, but it's not just about you as an individual. It's about a big understanding of the picture. Whilst the context, if someone's approaching me as a competitor, tends to be I'm competing at a very high level and I'm being swallowed by my fear. Help me.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So then there's what I would necessarily help, or how we would therapize that situation is very different potentially to how we would therapize the situation if they are a coach and they wanted to understand their anxiety and, importantly, their client's anxiety better.
Yeah, I get that 100%. And you are right in saying that in today's day and age, a lot of people who are heavily involved in fitness themselves do end up becoming coaches.
Yeah,
So
right. Yeah.
a lot of people who cross over into both of those categories.
Well, it's a vocational job, right? It absorbs everything. Your whole life becomes a fitness industry, which to be successful as a bodybuilder, you kind of have to. Like, there's very few successful, if any, and I don't actually know of any that hold down, once they get to that level, hold down normal, again, air quotation, but hold down 9-to-5 jobs and are IFBB pros.
Yeah.
I don't know of any IFBB pros with what quote unquote normal jobs. But so if you want to compete at that level, it's a very obvious step. How can I take my expertise and my hobby that has now become my lifestyle? Because your lifestyle has to be fitness. Like, it's very, very hard to be an IFBB pro if you are working in a McDonald's 9-to-5.
Yeah. And do you think that the fact that it does have to, in a lot of cases, become your life, if you want to be a professional bodybuilder, and it does become your career as well as your personal life, does that present its own issues?
It presents its own issues. This is a disgusting military term, a double-edged sword. So it's a double-edged sword, right? This is a terrible cliche. When a young soldier, when a young civilian says, I want to become a paratrooper, you say, okay, cool. And they go through the test and say, right, you have passed the basic test, ready to start your recruit training to become a paratrooper. They walk through the main gate of camp. The first thing we do is we shave their head. We then take their civilian clothes off them. We then put them in a uniform. We then take away their name and we give them a number. We teach them how to walk, how to talk, how to eat, how to breathe, how they communicate. Their language changes, their demeanor changes. Every single thing about their life changes to fit that outcome. Their identity changes. When you actually finish basic training, you're a terrible soldier. You don't actually know how to do your job. What they've done over that 6-month process is, well, depending upon your phase 1 and phase 2 length, but for most of phase 1, so the basic training, I think it's 14 weeks now. It's 14 weeks. So over that 14 weeks process, what they have done is they have changed your identity. You have gone from recruit to private. There, done. That has changed your identity to fit your outcome. You are far more likely to be successful because you're no longer motivated. Because motivation, if you have to be motivated to do everything to become a soldier, that's going to be a problem, because everything you do has to be about that soldiering. And the same thing is true of the fitness industry. If you want to be a successful bodybuilder, your identity has to be that of a successful bodybuilder. How are you eating? How are you sleeping? How are you drinking? Who are you spending your time with? How are you moving your body? What are you reading? What are you consuming? Everything. That identity piece is so important. You challenge your identity to figure out outcome. Now, in the same breath with the military, we have the same problem with the bodybuilders, which is what happens after?
Yeah.
Like who are you outside of that? Now, to help those military guys transition, which I often work with, is I tell them, discover your identity outside of the uniform whilst you're still in the uniform.
Yeah.
So I did all the coaching and mentoring. I fell in love with that. I wanted to help people. You know, I wanted to go into I want to go into prisons. I wanted to speak to vulnerable people. I want to work with the homeless. I want to speak to those people. You know, and that was reflected in this year. I was nominated for the Harvard Coaching School's 2023 Good Coaching Award because I love doing that. That's now become my identity. Like, how can I support people who can offer me nothing back? That became my identity, and I fell in love with doing that. And that's what I encourage with military individuals. Find your sense of identity outside of the uniform whilst you're still in the uniform. Bodybuilders, if this is not what you're going to do for the rest of your life, what are you going to do? Don't just stop one, slam the brakes on and go, oh my God, but who actually am I? Because where's my sense of identity? Where's my sense of purpose? Where's my sense of fulfillment anymore? Instead, find your sense of who you are outside of bodybuilding, outside of coaching, whilst you're still in it. Because that's important. And that sense of fulfillment and that sense of identity and that sense of purpose is so incredibly subjective. There's lots of amazing people who've written amazing things about it. Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning is one of the single greatest psychology books that's ever been written. The man is incredible. And I love so much of what he covers in it. He was a head psychological researcher at the University of Vienna in the 1930s, was captured by the National Socialist Party because he was Jewish, and he was sent to Auschwitz. And he turns up to Auschwitz on his first day, and his entire life's work is thrown on a bonfire in front of him. And then he survives Auschwitz as a psychiatrist, so he got a medical doctorate, survives, and he writes this book in his head of Man's Search for Meaning. And it's a new therapy style called logotherapy, which is Greek for logo for the meaning of purpose, so purpose therapy. And he talks about with purpose, with a great enough why, any how becomes completely irrelevant, which is amazing. Right, yeah, incredible, an incredible man. And so he writes this incredible book, Man's Search for Meaning. Like he's a really fascinating and brilliant man. He writes this book, but there's lots of other stuff about it. Alfred Adler defines fulfillment as finding what you are good at and using that to benefit the world around you. And even Aristotle, who in 358 BC, he was well onto this. He talked about dynamis. He was probably the first person. He was the first guy to talk about genetic potential. That isn't what he called it at the time. He called it dynamis, which is where we get dynamite from, which is something small, being able to provide huge explosive influence. And he talks about, like, what is your dynamis? Like, what is your potential and how are you fulfilling that? That's great. Like, if you fell in love with bodybuilding, you fell in love with that process and you fell in love with quality. But like all things, it has a life. And eventually it comes to an end. And you as a person, your situation, your reality, the context of your life changes. Well, who are you outside of that? And that becomes incredibly challenging. Because on the one hand, to be successful, your identity in your life has to be that. To get to that level, to get to that very top level, if that's what you want to do. Lots of people want to compete because they just want to compete, to say they've done it and they've done the challenge. And it still does absorb a large amount of your identity for that duration of time. Of course it does. But if you wanted to be the pro, it's everything. Okay, cool. And then when you get there and you've done it, or you've had enough time in the fitness industry, you go, I'm ready to move away. Who are you? Because if you've been defined by that one thing for so long, when you step away from that one thing after so long, that can be very, very hard. And that's what we see a huge amount of the challenges, particularly within veterans.
Yeah, myself and Charlie speak to a lot of people who have identified so heavily with fitness and bodybuilding that they're so scared to take a step back from it when they know that it's the right decision for them to take a step back from it. And I've definitely been there where, you know, when I did move away from bodybuilding, I 100% had a bit of an identity crisis because it felt like my world had been flipped upside down.
Yeah.
What would you advise to people who are in that situation where they've they've already heavily identified with bodybuilding, they've been in the sport for years, they want to take a step back, but they're so scared and they just don't know who they are without it? What would be the first steps for them to find out who they are without it?
One of the fascinating things about the fitness industry, let's stick specifically to bodybuilding. One of the interesting things about bodybuilding is it's such a restrictive life that almost to say to someone, who are you without 3 tubs of chicken and rice a day? It's like, well, I don't know. But you're saying it wrong, because that's exciting, right? Like, what are the things you haven't done that you want to do?
Yeah.
What things do you admire? Who do you admire? What and who do you look up to? Like, what is it you want to do? You know, I've always fancied being a first responder. Awesome. What an incredible person you are. Go and do the first responder course. Go and do that. Go and be brilliant at that. Oh, okay. Like, start finding these things, all these things that you want to explore. And that's not an overwhelming conversation. That's an exciting conversation. That's the whole point of introspective conversation. So whilst you're in this place, start exploring yourself, start exploring ideas and aspects of your character that you never knew before. We're all incredibly multifaceted, and that kind of ties massively into interactionist theory. You know, we all have lots and lots of different sides of ourselves that need exploration. And actually, the more we suppress those sides of ourselves, the more it actually manifests itself in really negative ways, which it definitely can be true. Like, there's quite extreme examples, but when you say, for example, an individual's sexuality, when we suppress a sexuality, often manifests itself in negative behaviors, or can do, particularly within men. We can observe that behavior. So what's really important is that you learn to express all these different, multifaceted, brilliant, wonderful, beautiful sides of yourself that you've potentially suppressed to stick to bodybuilding so that you can then explore and grow as a human being. Like you have focus on this one thing. And that's great. That's great, because to be successful at something, chances are you do have to dedicate a huge portion of your life to it. Like it's very hard to achieve a high level of anything if you are a person who wants to achieve a high level of something, but it's very difficult to achieve a high level of something if you're constantly exploring lots of alternative options. But once you've reached that high level and you go, well, actually, who am I outside of this? That is a really, really interesting then part of your life. And it's really exciting as a therapist. It's exciting. It's fulfilling to see. And people say, I did this. I've never played hockey before, or I've never gone basketball, or I've never walked a mountain, or I've never gone and had food like that before. I never knew that freedom existed. We often create this cage in our head of no, I have to eat this, or I have to get this amount of steps in, or I have to go and train this, I have to go and do that. And you go, life is for living. That's great that you focus so much on this one thing and that you've achieved what you wanted to achieve in it. That's brilliant. And you should be really proud of yourself. You absolutely should be. Now you're stepping out of it. Like enjoy the beauty and wonder that is the world around you. But we could be so encaged by these limiting beliefs because this is all we've known. It's Plato's cave. So Plato talks about his cave, and he talks about people who are chained to the cave wall. And then all they know of the real world is how people who have passed by the mouth of this cave have gone and made like shadow puppets or explain the world outside, but they don't know the world outside. And then Plato talks about the courage to actually take the chains off, stand up and walk outside of that cave. And the sun is glaring and it's going to be blinding and overwhelming at first, but soon you're going to get to experience the world.
Yeah.
Someone might walk past the cave entrance and tell you what a dog looks like and what it's like to have a dog, but that doesn't mean you know what it's like to have a dog. Not until you step outside the cave will you ever know what that's like. And that's like the same. It's like when you're in this bodybuilding world, you have to get in this cave of bodybuilding. And people talk about going on these amazing adventures and holidays and stories of love and romance and beauty that exists in the world. And they're sitting there and someone's explaining this to them and they're doing the shadow puppets on the wall with the shadows, but they'll never know until you take those chains off and walk outside. And that's what you're talking about. You're taking the chains off and you're walking outside Plato's cave of ignorance to experience the world. And that is terrifying, but it's also so exciting.
Yeah. I always say to clients, like, there's so much opportunity in front of you.
Right.
It's like a new adventure. And if you can change your perspective and focus on things that you have to look forward to when you're going through this difficult transition, it can be a game changer when it comes to your relationship with the process. I think a lot of people who find it a lot more difficult to take that step back and lean into the discomfort of trying new things and discovering who they are without bodybuilding often are the coaches who are also scared of what might happen to their business.
Yeah.
If they step away from competing as well. Like, what would your advice be to those people who know they need to take a step back, but they're like, I've built my business based upon my own bodybuilding journey. Like, how do I do this?
Do you know the story of David and Goliath, right? So Goliath was this huge behemoth of a man. He was like 6'8", in a time where the average height of the man was like 5'4". So like, sorry to everybody's dating profiles, but back then you'd have to put no men under 5'4", please. So like they were 5'4", and he was like 6'8". This guy was like, this isn't genetic. What they actually believe is he had a benign tumor in his pituitary gland. And the reason why they believe he had a benign tumor in his pituitary gland is because he displayed lots of the negative health markers of someone with that, the size of him. And the argument as well that he was blind, because what was really interesting, so he had the Philistine army line up on one side of a valley, and he had the Israeli army line up on the other side of the valley. And actually in the center of this valley was a little village known as Bethlehem. There was quite an important guy allegedly born there a few thousand years later. And they basically said, right, you're going to send out your best warrior, send out your best fighter, and whoever wins this wins a whole war, and the other people get the army and they get their wife and they get their children and get everything. And so they went, okay, so the Philistines sent out Goliath. What was interesting about Goliath is he didn't walk out, he was led out. He was led out, and this is all in the original scripture, if you're super excited and you like to read stuff like that. He took led out Goliath, and he was led out, and he dressed Goliath, this young boy who brought him out, dressed Goliath on the battlefield, gave him his sword and shield. Now, the Israelites then sent out this young shepherd's boy, David. But if your entire army rested upon his success, why would you send out a risk as big as a little boy with a slingshot? Now, what's really interesting, this shepherd's boy, David, again, is said to be accurate within a hair's breadth. And as David walked out, he picked up a rock from the floor. He didn't come like prepared. He was like, oh, there's one, that'll do. And he picked that up. And Goliath says, why are you carrying sticks, boy? For I am not a dog. He wasn't carrying any sticks. And then he said, come closer so I can kill you. Goliath was blind. He had a benign tumor on his pituitary gland, which is why he was a foot and a bit taller than everybody else in a day and age where men were tiny because nutritional health was so shocking. And so David picks up a rock, swings his slingshot, hits Goliath in the center of the head, and Goliath falls to the ground dead. David then walks up, picks up Goliath's sword, cuts off Goliath's head, and holds the head up to the Philistine army, who all run away. The point is this, is that you may perceive yourself to be vulnerable and at a disadvantage, but turn that disadvantage into an advantage. What is it about you? Like David was small, he was agile, he was petite, and you know what? He could throw a stone. So this Goliath of this world, this fitness industry with these huge bodybuilders, with these huge followings that you could never defeat in a fight. You could never defeat them in a fight unless you didn't fight them how they wanted to be fought. Unless you were the David. What is it about you? Turn your vulnerabilities into your greatest strength. When I first went independent, I was told you will never be able to compete with those massive mental health provider companies. And you know what? They were right. But you know what? I don't have to knock to walk into the offices that they have to wait 6 months outside of to get into. Why? Because I don't try and deliver to huge thousands of people, but I do have the CEO's ear. Because I'm not them. I'm not going to fight like them. I'm never going to win. I will get absolutely crushed. I can't do huge presentations to Barclays. I can't do huge presentations to JP Morgan in central London. I can't do those. They own that market. That's cool. I'm not going to fight them how they want to be fought. What is your greatest vulnerability and make it your strength? It's just you on your own. Yeah. So I am my brand. So I can appeal to people on a far greater human level than you can. So those people who are in the bodybuilding industry, who are coaches, who are worried about how they're going to survive as a coach from the outside, what is your vulnerability and how can you make that your strength? Much like David and Goliath. David didn't come out with a huge sword and try and fight Goliath. He was never going to win that fight. Instead, fight him on your terms. What is your greatest weakness and how can you make that your strength? In the way that I was told, you're just an individual, you're just on your own, you're never going to manage. That's actually become my greatest strength. My greatest strength is that I am not a faceless organization. I'm a very flawed, open, vulnerable human being. But that is why I appeal to certain people.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's incredible advice. And it's very in line with the fact that if you do act in line with your own personal values and you do what's genuinely right for you, you'll be your healthiest, happiest self. You'll show up better on social media. Your content will get way more engagement. You'll actually have real conversations with people. You'll attract the clients who you actually enjoy coaching and are all right for you and will stay on board.
Yeah.
As opposed to people that are attracted to you because of surface level stuff that you're putting out that isn't really you. So I think that's such an important message for people to hear.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and absolutely. And authenticity is key, right? Because authenticity revolves around vulnerability, and vulnerability is connection. And that's what you want. You want to connect with people. So now I guess it's kind of like you just have to have this disingenuous but genuine vulnerability, but just speak from the heart because that connects people. You know, be open, be vulnerable, be terrified. I remember my first, so I'm an investor at Fit Expo and I do stuff on the education stage and I love it, right? But I remember like when it was a meeting in Crayford Weights and Fitness and I turned up there and I didn't know anyone in the bodybuilding industry. Like I didn't know anyone. I'd been introduced because a guy who owned my local gym, he's one of my best mates, I love him very much, Ben Rowe, had said to Darren, I've got a mate, James, who's trying to do like this bench press deadlift world record thing. He's a lunatic. Like he'll definitely be up for it. He means that in the most endearing, loving way. Like he's like he'll do it. And Darren rang me, said, do you want to do deadlift or do you want to do bench press? I was like, I'll do both, mate. We'll have a laugh with it. Don't worry about it. If you're short on numbers, I'll just crack both. And he was like, legend. So I went down there and here's all these bodybuilders. And I don't know who any of them are. And I just walked in and I said, lads, I'm really sorry. I don't know who anyone is. I feel like my mum's just dropped me off outside of a party and said, go make friends. And I don't know who anyone is. It's really lovely to meet you all though. And they were like, I didn't expect that to come from you. Because I'm quite a confident guy, but like, I didn't know anyone. I'm like, it's overwhelming. And then because I said, look, this is overwhelming, it's scary. I don't know who anyone is. then people then, oh, well, actually, I'm drawn to that. Oh, I like that. That's connection. Oh, yeah, sound. We talk about that all the time now. I talk about authenticity is key to human interaction. Like, it absolutely is. Like, if you turn to someone and go, this is terrifying, mate. It's horrible. I don't know what I'm doing. Someone goes, oh my God, I'm so glad you said that. I feel the exact same way. And now you have that friendship. Now you have that connection. And the same is true, like on social media. Just be open and honest and vulnerable and flawed. Just talk about your mistakes and talk about who you are. And people are inevitably drawn to that in a really good way. There's this thing about your vibe attracts your tribe. And although I'm not necessarily a fan of the language per se, like, there is something so true about that, where, you know, how can you expect to meet really good friends who connect with you on a really emotional level when you're not doing the things that bring out the emotions within you? So if you love to dance, you're a dancer and you love to dance, but you never go anywhere where there's dancing, and you wonder why you're struggling to then make those friends and have those genuine connections, meet those brilliant, beautiful, wonderful people that love to dance as much as you love to dance. Well, because you're not being your true authentic self. When you're being your true authentic self, the right people will see that and go, wow, that's brilliant. That's fantastic. I thought that the talk that you and Charlie were involved with at Fit Expo, I thought was fascinating and brilliant. But if you weren't being your true authentic self, you wouldn't have got up on that stage and done that talk. And then we would never be having this discussion.
Yeah.
That authenticity is key, because you're putting that out there. You're saying, this is who I actually am. And the right people, therefore, being drawn to that. But if you're where you shouldn't be doing what you shouldn't be doing, then inevitably you're going to meet people that don't actually fit who you and what you are.
Yeah.
So your authenticity is key to your brand.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I just think it's so powerful for people to hear that. And hopefully anyone who's listening who is a coach, who is scared of taking a step back from a sport, whatever that might be, whether it be bodybuilding or powerlifting, because they're scared of what might happen to their business, just remember, like, people will respect you for doing what's right for you. And that whatever journey I think people are on, there are other people out there who will resonate with that and who will benefit from them sharing that openly and being who they are naturally, and then you'll attract the right people for you. And there's also a lot to be said for actually providing value on social media and showing that you're great at what you do through other kinds of content, as opposed to just building a business based upon your external appearance.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that one of the things myself and Charlie see is with a lot of coaches and personal trainers who have built their business around their own personal journey, whether that be in bodybuilding or just going through like cutting and bulking phases, so to speak, is that they really struggle with their body image because their business is so heavily tied to their body composition.
Yeah.
Is that something you see amongst clients and people?
It's when they've set off the stage and they're doing the reverse dieting phase of that's when they see it and they go, oh my God, I'm actually beginning to look like a human, say for example, female. I'm beginning to actually look like a human and not just like an absolute shredded comic book character of like muscularity and incredible physiqueness. I'm actually just beginning to look like a woman. And you're like, yeah, the same with the guys. Like, they're so huge and lean. They look like comic book villains. And then they step off stage and they allow their body to have what it needs to survive. And it's so, like, here we go. Like, you look like a human being again, and you feel like a human being, but these people then looking in the mirror and hating what it is that they see. And it is so challenging for an individual, like body dysmorphia, because what you're simply seeing is not the same as what everyone else is seeing. You know, like, you are, and it is really heartbreaking. I actually find it quite heartbreaking when it's more so when it's the girls. And you shouldn't overly emotionally commit to anything, but it is objectively very sad when a girl is going, I look disgusting and I hate my body, and that's just a heartbreaking thing to hear.
Yeah.
And you have to then kind of have this discussion about beauty, what inner beauty means, and like all of the things that make them so incredible, make them so fulfilled, and make them so happy, and what it is that they bring, without focusing on the body, the figure, the physique, however it is. Learning to kind of relax and understand the process of why it is you're doing this and why your body needs it and what it is that's going on. It is really difficult. I find it really a scathing indictment of their coach when they step off stage, and the coach then is like, okay, cool, see you later. Like, because I'm not a bodybuilding coach, I'm not in this business to do that. So I can't tell them how many calories they need to consume or why or what it is that they're doing. So that phase of reverse dieting and the psychological support that you can offer to your clients as they're going through reverse dieting is absolutely something that coaches should now be offering.
Yeah. Do you think those like body image and body dysmorphia issues are often present before people get into heavily involved in fitness, or do you think they are often brought about by being heavily involved in fitness or bodybuilding?
Well, the kind of watching answer to that is both, but I do think that I think the kind of macho in all cases. So before I kind of delve into this, Carl Jung in Jungian psychiatry says that every individual you meet is the exception to the rule. However, I think what's really important to know is, why do people get involved in the fitness industry? For a lot of them, it is, I need that control in my life. And so they will micro control huge elements of their life, like every calorie, every step, every moment they sleep needs quantifying in some way. And it's that hyper control because we've lacked control in our lives in other ways. From things like childhood trauma is a great example of that. People who grow up in like really unstable childhood homes are more likely to then develop like quite complex needs around things like control and anxiety over lack of control as an adult. So do people go to the fitness industry because everything is so quantified, measured, and exact that it feels like it's giving them that comfort because they feel like they have that detailed level of control in their life? I would argue that yes. I would also argue that some people do indeed go to the fitness industry, particularly within bodybuilding, for seeking that validation. You are literally standing on a stage in your underwear, asking people to judge you. And it is very, very, very much encouraged. It's very much rewarded. There's a lot of positive reward around doing this. What is effectively dressage for humans. And not only that, when we then look at the language that's then involved within a lot of the marketing within the bodybuilding industry, it's stuff like alpha, warrior, mutant, monster, all of this stuff to kind of give this impression that what you're doing is like hyper masculine and tough and strong and brilliant, and you are a monster of a man. Yeah. Count that calorie that little bit more. Push yourself that little bit further. Be harder to yourself in the mirror. Like, very little language within the bodybuilding industry orientates around self-compassion. Like all of these like motivational, quote unquote, motivational videos, which I don't find motivational at all. Like, you're not a lion, you work in the gym. Like, let's chill. Like, you're a warrior. Are you? But that's what it's projecting. So you get people who are then seeking validation, who need that level of control, and they're being thrown into this world that's constantly judging them, that your worth is built upon how it is that you look all the time, 24/7, particularly in social media, exacerbates the fact that you are accessible 24/7, and how you look 24/7 is so important. And then, of course, there's that constant validation. People telling you, "Oh, you look amazing, babes. Look amazing, babes. Look amazing, babes. Look amazing, babes." I have a friend who showed me that she put a picture up of her like lean, and it got like 8,000 likes. Like, she was on stage or about to get on stage, whatever it was. And then post like reverse dieting, 6 weeks later, she posted a picture up in her, in a bikini or whatever, and it got like 200 likes. That's hard then to step away from that dopamine spike that you get from all of those likes. Like, those dopamine spikes are like, that's what I want to do. That's then going to lead you down that. That's then going to develop that negative pattern of behavior. I'm getting that validation because I'm so in control of every element of my life and every single aspect of it. So these pre-existing conditions that an individual has, like a pre-existing eating disorder, now the disordered eating, now it's being celebrated. Now people aren't going, "I'm really worried about your health. Can we please look at this in more detail? Can you please go speak to someone?" Now people are going, "You look amazing, babes. Incredible. Well done." And you do, but as long as the thing actually that is most important that you are in control of, yourself. As long as you can consciously identify these things and know that you challenge it and keep a very rational view on what it is that you are doing. And it is not consuming you. That's the key. But yeah, like, the bodybuilding industry absolutely does appeal to people who have had those things missing. We quite often find ourselves as adults trying to replace the things that we needed as children, and not always in the healthiest of ways.
Yeah, it's that cycle of chasing external validation it can be so addictive for a lot of people, I think, because it keeps you so stuck, because it's a never-ending cycle. Like once you get a little hit, it's like, okay, it's gone again, I need the next little hit, and so I'm going to do something else for validation. And I think what people need to recognize is that you're never going to feel truly satisfied if you're constantly in this pursuit of external validation, because it is so temporary, and once you've got that little bit, you're going to want a little bit more, and from a different source. And so if people find that they are stuck in this cycle of chasing external validation, and they've realized that they do have an attachment, say like likes and interaction on social media and things like that, how can they break that cycle, and how can they learn to stop validating themselves?
Well, I would say, as a professional, I'd say get therapeutic support. There are absolutely things, but like they become so nuanced and subjective. The question isn't why are you seeking external validation? It's why do you think you need it? Like what happened, and more importantly, what wasn't happening in your childhood for you to believe that you need someone else to tell you that you're doing great? Why can you not just believe that you're doing great? But, an element of requiring external validation is not always a negative thing. That's why we have degrees, and that's why we put art up in galleries, and that's why music gets played on the radio. Like an element of desiring external validation is not a bad thing. A tiny drop of narcissism is not a bad thing. We all have that trait within us, and it's actually quite important, not just for the survival of ourselves, but for the development of the human race, that we do want to achieve more than previously has been achieved, and we do want to display that to our fellow humans. There's not anything necessarily wrong with that at all. In fact, an element of it is very healthy. However, it's when that consumes you. So at what point has that happened, and what has been lacking in your childhood for you to believe that you need that from other people? And that's the key word, that need. Why do you feel that you need that external validation? Those who were not spoon-fed love as a child have had to learn to lick it off of knives. What is going on? Why do you feel the need for other people to validate your every move, and to tell you that you're doing brilliant, and support you and cheer you and clap you? Why do you feel that you are not enough to do that to yourself?
Yeah. And on the food front as well, you mentioned that a lot of people get into bodybuilding or like fitness because it does provide this meticulous control, which they might be seeking due to feeling out of control of other aspects of life, or having done so in the past. Why is it then problematic to turn to control in food? Like, what issues can that present for people that they maybe need to be aware of?
Well, if you're hyper focusing on anything, it's very easy to only see that thing. Like when you're staring down a sight, then you become completely unaware of what's going on in your peripheral. So you become so hyper-focused on food, you don't see the reality of the life that's going on around you. And it's important to understand what fuels your body, and it's important to understand things in moderation. And it's important that you know when, do you know what, maybe I do need to lose a little bit of excess weight, or maybe I do want to gain a bit of muscle. And it's really, really important. And do you know what? An element of competing can be fantastic for that. There are people who have walked away from stage and go, I now know exactly how to feed my body. And that's actually given me liberty with food. That gives me an element of freedom. I know that I can go a bit wild here and neaten it up there, or whatever it is that I want to do. You don't have to calorie count anymore. You're fully aware of what your body. Wonderful. That's great. That's the best case scenario. You walk away from bodybuilding well aware of what it is that your body needs, so that you can meet that, but also live a life. Wonderful. But when you become hyper-focused on something, it's very difficult to see anything outside of that. And that kind of doubles back exactly to what we're talking to at the start, whereby you become so fixated on what bodybuilding is, that to step outside and see anything outside of that cave is completely overwhelming. You get so obsessed with food, and that becomes such a huge part of your routine and your rhythm, particularly like when we observe like the neuroplasticity and the development of habit. The idea then that cognitive dissonance actually creates distress within the brain to say, do you know what, maybe I don't need to start the day with 200 grams of oats and a scoop of whey protein powder in it. Your brain is going, no, but that's our habit. That's what we've got to do. That's survival. We survive if we do that. And you go in, no, I want a bacon sandwich. And that becomes challenging. So there's that element of you become so hyper focused on it that your brain itself becomes fixated upon the achievement of this, and you get little hits of dopamine every time you complete a habit because we associate that with survival. So you have that little hit of dopamine because you're doing the same thing that you have always done and will always do. But if you then say, do you know what, maybe I've become so fixated on this thing that I'm ready to step away from bodybuilding, and I don't want to become so hyper fixated on food, which is becoming the source of so much of my drama. Like I haven't had a nice, enjoyable, relaxed, mindful evening out with my friends for 15 years. 15 years I've not been able to sit at a barbecue. 15 years I've not been able to go to restaurants. 15 years I've not been able to go to the cinema and get a large sweet and salted popcorn and a Tango Ice Blast. I've not been able to do that. You're not living life because you become so fixated on this thing. So that can be the source of many, many people's drama.
Yeah, 100%. When it starts to interfere with your ability to live your life and feel content on a daily basis, that's often like heavily problematic. I know you've got to go, James. So I feel like we could talk for so much longer. It's been an absolute pleasure having you. Where can people find you on socials? Obviously, I'll put all your details down below, but where's the best place to contact you?
So my Instagram is James Elliott Official. For the people who are involved in business or corporate or whatever it might be, I am on LinkedIn as James Elliott. And my book is called Think Yourself, Resilient, and it's obviously by me, James Elliott. So yeah, thank you so much for having me, Danni. Thank you so much for listening out.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure. And guys, if you do enjoy the content on the Flourishing Society podcast, please do like, subscribe, and leave us a review. Tag us on your Instagram story as well, James and myself, and I will see you in the next one.
Thank you.